Well, I'm the type of guy who never settles down. Pretty girls are, you know that I'm around. Kiss them and I love them, 'cause to me they're all the same. I hug them and I squeeze them, they don't even know my name. I'm the wanderer, yeah, I'm the wanderer. I roam around and round and round and round.
Hello and welcome to Choice Conversations. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. So as some of you may know, a while back I did a parenting podcast with Kevin Geary called Reboot Your Kids. Now, that podcast, we ended up discontinuing it as Kevin just ran out of time. He didn't have the time to keep recording the episodes. They were interview formats, and they ran from like an hour to an hour and a half. And with the work he's putting into his other podcast and the Rebooted Body service that he runs and that he makes his living off of that, he just didn't have the time to have a podcast of that nature. Having said that, he has since started a new parenting podcast that is a much shorter format. He is, because he's so passionate about parenting, this new podcast, the Powerful Parenting Podcast, he is going to answer listener questions, just taking one question per podcast, maybe a 10 or 15 minute podcast where he helps the listeners to work through their issues. So I encourage you to check out the Powerful Parenting Podcast. Really good stuff. In the meantime, I've decided that I am going to put the Reboot Your Kids podcast into the Choice Conversations feed as part of this switching from the Reboot Your Kids podcast to the Powerful Parenting podcast. The old podcasts were taken down on the Reboot Your Kids website, so you cannot get them there any longer. And I thought just for posterity's sake, it would be great to have them available so that they could help other parents going forward. So with that in mind, I'm just going to put them into the Choice Conversations feed over the next few weeks. And if you haven't listened to them, enjoy them. If you have already listened to them in the past, feel free to skip them or give them a second listen. But I just thought I'd give you a heads up on why you're now seeing Reboot Your Kids. All right, well, I hope you enjoy them. Take care.
Welcome back to the Reboot Your Kids podcast, the intersection of real food, peaceful parenting, and alternative education. My name is Kevin Geary. I am your host, and I'm about to get my co-host Chris on the line. Today's episode, and we want to thank you, by the way, for being with us. Today's episode is about a blog article that I published at the rebootyourkids.com blog called 12 Absurd Arguments Peaceful Parents Are Sick of Hearing. Now, this article went viral, so to speak, tens of thousands of visits in just a few days, well over 100 comments. Now, I had to take a few of these comments off of the blog because, to tell you the truth, they were just personal insults and name calling and things like that, so they didn't make it, but there's about 94 comments that are still there. And what I wanted to do, I asked Chris, I was like, hey, look, can I read this blog article on the air and let's discuss the article. Let's go a little deeper here. And I also want to discuss some of the comments that were left on the article. Now, because of the length of this episode, we have chopped it up into two parts. You are listening to part one. I believe this is all of the 12 absurd arguments and a little bit of our discussion about them. And then part two is going to be the comments that I wanted to highlight and discussion about them. So this is a great episode, I think. Very entertaining, very insightful, a lot of actionable stuff we talk about here. And this is going to give you a really great idea and kind of like an insider look into our thinking. And it's going to help you. This is really important, I think. It's going to help you better understand the position that you're looking to take. And that's really important. I mean, you shouldn't just listen to us and take our advice. You should believe in the advice. You should deeply understand the why behind the advice. And I think this episode really serves that purpose. So let's get into it. Hey, Chris, how's it going?
I'm doing very good. Yourself?
I am doing excellent. So I published this article, 12 Absurd Arguments Peaceful Parents Are Sick of Hearing, and it got shared around a ton. It's gotten well over 20,000 visits so far, and there was a lot of controversy in it, and a lot of comments were left. Right now, I think we're sitting at 82 comments. A lot of them very positive comments. There's many objections as well, and there's some specific objections to a certain part of the article that I want to cover. But what I think it would be great to do is just read the article. And while I'm reading, if you want to stop me at any point and say, maybe you have an objection to a point that I made, or you think that it's a friction point for people where they may have a tough time, swallowing it or whatever, go ahead and feel free to stop me and just jump in, and we'll have a discussion about that part. And then when we get to the end, I want to highlight a few of the comments, not the positive comments. I want to just focus on some of the objections. And I have already replied to these comments. You told me that you have not gone through the comment section, so you don't know what the comments are, and you don't know what my response is. So I think it would be great to just hear your, off the cuff response to these comments, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. This should be fun.
Cool. All right. So again, the article is titled 12 Absurd Arguments Peaceful Parents Are Sick of Hearing. The parenting landscape is rapidly changing. Peaceful parenting principles are taking root and spreading, and that's a great thing. But there is still a lot of work to do. As my daughter gets older, her experiences expand. That means coming into contact with more people and more personalities. My wife and I meet new teachers, coaches, and fellow parents. We're exposed to what's considered, quote unquote, the mainstream. From where I stand, the mainstream is still quite lost when it comes to leading children. There's a lot of open-mindedness, which is great, but there's also a lot of ignorance. I've decided that I've had enough of responding to the same tired objections to my parenting approach. I'm not interested in wasting my breath. What I really need is an article that I can send people right before I drop them from my Facebook list and the contacts list on my iPhone. So here it is, 12 absurd arguments that I'm tired of hearing. Undoubtedly, I've left a few out. Feel free to add them to the comment section. I'll add the good ones to the article post hoc.
So I just wanted to say something real quick.
Yeah.
So if you're about to drop somebody from your Facebook list and your iPhone, why do you need to respond to them at all?
That's a great question. And I don't think I personally need to respond to them. The tone of the article and the reason for the article. So this isn't an article where I'm like, all right, all of you mainstream parents, come in close and let's have a really compassionate discussion about these excuses that are made all the time. This is more like if you've had a conversation with somebody and they've just shown that their entire approach is set to protect the status quo. And they want nothing. They want no part of reason or logic or anything else. And they're just shutting you down at every turn. This could be something that you just send them. Or, more importantly, probably, this is meant to rally peaceful parents and make them understand or help them understand that there is principle and reason tied to what they're doing. And they do have people backing them up. And they do have great reasons for what they do. And I think that helps because there are a lot of peaceful parents being attacked, right? There are a lot of mainstream parents who say, you, by being a peaceful parent, are going to screw up our society, basically. So I think that right. Peaceful parents do need support, and they do need to understand that the strategies that they're following, and, I think they believe in them wholeheartedly, but they also need to know that they're backed up by logic and reason and principles and values and virtue.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is it's not so much that you need to get the last word in to smooth your ego with this person that you're never going to talk to again, and it's not directed necessarily at the person you're having the discussion with. It's more whatever audience might be watching in Facebook. So there might be people on both sides of the equation, or there could be some people sitting on the fence that are observing this argument. And rather than just backing out and letting them have the last word, and maybe not completely addressing all of their arguments because you get frustrated having to do this. You say, here's a nice canned package answers to all these arguments. They're not designed to connect with you because I have no desire to connect with you. It's just, here are my responses to all of these arguments. And for the audience who might be on the fence or maybe needing a little encouragement because they are in peaceful parenting and they're receiving those same arguments, here's a little something for you all.
Right, exactly. And, I think a lot of times peaceful parents, especially if they're new to peaceful parenting or they've recently made the switch, or it's the same way in politics, for example, where you're trying your best to figure out where the virtue is, where the values are, where the principles lie, and then you're going to try to make your decisions based on that. But somebody brings up an objection and you haven't heard this objection before, and their objection on the surface sounds very reasonable, but you don't have an answer for it. And that there probably is an answer. Somebody that you are trying to align with has probably, rebutted this objection before. So we need to know what was the rebuttal and what is the reason and logic. What is the response to this objection here? So I think this, empowers people with information as well. It gives them, because really you go to any parenting forum and you're going to run into these 12 statements over and over and over and over again. So I think it helps. Like you said, here's a list of canned responses that are really thoughtful, and hopefully you can just leave this and move on, and you don't have to sit here and respond over and over and over if you feel like you need to for some reason to these statements.
Got it. Yeah, and that's a really good analogy comparing it to politics, because there's if you say you're not for the welfare state, then what? You want kids to starve?
Right. You
want poor kids to starve, or you have a problem with public education. You don't want these poor children to be educated, So right, and you might not have an answer for that, and
exactly.
So now you're providing some ammunition to these peaceful parents who are maybe not as far along in the process.
Right, because if somebody gets that argument, inside they're like, well, wait, hold on, I'm a good person. I wouldn't want kids to go uneducated, but at the same time, I can't. I've never heard that before, and I don't know how to respond to you. But if you talk to somebody who's been in, libertarianism or anarchism for a very long time, they know what the answer is, right? And they know how that's an actually manipulated question. So they can explain that. And I think there's a lot of manipulation in these 12 statements and arguments. And really, I'm pointing that out. What I'm trying to do mostly, I think, in all of these articles is just point out people's hypocrisy. Like, you're not allowed to be a hypocrite. You can have opinions and you can have, you can make statements. Just don't make statements that contradict other statements or other beliefs that you already have. And that's what I'm trying to point out mostly to people.
Got it.
Okay. So, all right, the first one is kids are out of control these days because we're too soft on them. My parents beat respect into me. All right, so this is two absurd theories in one. The first is that kids are out of control these days compared to some arbitrary time in the past. The second is that being harsh and aggressive towards kids works to create peaceful citizens. Every generation seems to believe that they're uniquely out of control. The media does a great job perpetuating this myth, but where is the evidence? There isn't any. There's also no evidence that hitting people builds respect. 90% of parents admit to hitting their children, so shouldn't we have a society that's full of amazingly respectful people? The black community uses corporal punishment to a larger degree than any other culture, while their violent crime rate far exceeds all others. If you truly want to advance society, stop assaulting, coercing, and manipulating children. Growing up in a peaceful environment teaches you the language of peace. Growing up in a violent, aggressive, or coercive household teaches you the language of those tactics.
Yeah, so let me just say real quick, I don't have a problem with your arguments, but this one, it's just so ridiculous. My parents beat respect into me. Do you understand at all what respect is?
Right.
Okay, so do I say to you, Kevin, I don't really feel like my boss respects me. So, I'm thinking tomorrow I'm just going to go up and slug him in the face, or I'm going to take him, I'm going to use my superior size and strength to put him over my knee, pull his pants down, and spank his ass.
Right.
Then I'm thinking that's going to be the way for me to get respect from him. I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? It is really ridiculous. So
yeah, I mean, if you look at Google or Apple, they are not great companies with employees that respect the cause, because there's a culture of corporal punishment at Apple or at Google, right? It's not, Steve Jobs didn't go around hitting people and spanking people to get them to respect the culture at Apple. All right. So it doesn't make sense. Nobody has ever respected anybody else. Now, they feared other people because they were hit and assaulted, but they've never legitimately, authentically respected anybody who ever hit them.
Yeah. It's such a misunderstanding of the concept of respect, and I think it's really, sad. And it's, it, of course, like so many of these, has to do with just a lack of self-awareness and, people finding ways to deal with their own psychological wounding, having to find a way to reconcile the fact that their parents beat the crap out of them. And, it's a defense mechanism. So,
yep. All right. So number 3 is negotiating with kids is a sign of weakness. So using the word negotiation and parenting in the same sentence is a no-no in the authoritarian world. The fear is that permitting negotiation gives kids power, and if you give kids an inch, they'll take a mile. The reality is that the world operates on the principle of negotiation, and negotiating with kids will give them the tools they need to be successful, peaceful adults. When parents use power and dominance in replace of negotiation, they forfeit the opportunity to teach their kids powerful negotiation skills while sending the message that aggressiveness and coercion are the best tools for getting what you want. All of the evil in the world comes from power-based, coercive, authoritarian institutions that demand obedience. Think religions and government. On the contrary, the marketplace, the driving force of peace and prosperity, is built on a foundation of negotiation and voluntary interaction. But one must be raised with the tools necessary to interact in the marketplace, lest they be drawn to power.
No, very, very good stuff. The only small critique I would have, and this is a really, really small critique, would be you're missing the institution, authoritarian institution that is the root of all evil in the world, and that's the family. So
definitely, okay.
that one's bigger than religion or government as far as its cause on evil in the world. And I would say the evils that we see coming out of religion and government are rooted in the evils that are first, the seeds that are first being sown in that family institution. So
absolutely. So that's what we're looking to change, right? By this mission of peaceful parenting, because that changes the family dynamic, and then these other dynamics will eventually dissolve, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
That's the idea.
Okay. Good.
Seems to be pretty well rooted in scientific evidence as well. I mean, I think the science is on our side. It's not just our opinions that we can reduce violence and have healthier, happier people by improving the family with peaceful parenting. There is a lot of science supporting this. So maybe someday we should probably need to do a blog article on the science, and then we can do a podcast on it as well, but kind of detailing that this isn't just my opinion. It's not just your opinion. Yeah. There is a lot of evidence supporting that. So
yeah, Stefan Molyneux did a great, presentation called The Bomb in the Brain. And I did kind of write a new blog post that was in response to some of the objections, I should say, to this article. It's called Corporal Punishment, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and the Creation of Violent and Broken People. I make a unique argument ahead of posting Stefan Molyneux's Bomb in the Brain presentation. So that's on the Reboot Your Kids blog also right now as well. People want to check it out.
Nice. Yeah, it's on my short list of things to read, but I have not read that yet, so my apologies.
All right, so next one is kids need to be punished so they associate negative consequences with their behavior. That's how life works. This is an either-or fallacy. Either kids are punished and learn about consequences, or they aren't punished and never learn about them. It begs the question, what is our goal as parents? Is our goal to raise empathetic kids who want to do the right thing? Or is our goal to raise kids who are obedient to rules and to avoid negative consequences? Well over 95% of households use punishments to teach consequences, and we still have the largest prison population in the world. People still get speeding tickets, and lots of people get fired from jobs. Where is the evidence for the efficacy of teaching about consequences? Besides, you can learn about things without experiencing them. I don't need to run my child over with a car to teach them about the dangers of moving automobiles. If you raise an empathetic and virtuous child, they'll naturally avoid situations that have negative consequences.
Nope. Sounds good. Like it.
Okay.
I like pointing out the fallacies. Excellent stuff.
All right, good. Now, I will admit, I said well over 95% of households use punishments to teach consequences. That is not backed up by any research. That is probably just an anecdote. It is my personal, when I walk around the world and I watch parents interact with kids, 9.5 adults out of 10, in my estimation, are using punishments and rewards and manipulation in that manner. But I will admit that is a random statistic.
I'll never forgive you.
All right. So the next one. My parents hit me and I turned out just fine. In fact, I'm glad that they spanked me. This is probably the most popular default response. It comes from a place of defense. Defense for one's parents, defense for one's own past behavior, and emotional defense against the trauma itself. The statement, I turned out fine, is empty rhetoric. Most people who say it aren't qualified or self-aware enough to make a quality determination of their psychological health. In many cases, they're clearly not fine. They drink excessively, they have relationship problems, they struggle with self-esteem issues, and so on. Fine, on the other hand, fits them perfectly. They're fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. The fact that they advocate for repeatedly hitting a small defenseless child whose brain is undeveloped is proof that they are the acronym FINE and not actually fine.
Right. So this one was where my giraffe ear started to perk up a little bit.
Uh-huh.
So for those of you who are not familiar, nonviolent communication, the term they use the term giraffe for somebody who speaks nonviolent communication. So in nonviolent communication, this labeling people as fucked up, insecure, neurotic, that's a diagnosis. And it's one of the 4 Ds of disconnected communication, where when I see that, I'm thinking, okay, whoever it is you're talking to, you just blew any chance you had of being able to make a connection with them and get them to see your point of view. The only caveat I could give you in defense of this is you did say at the beginning of the article, this is where I've reached the point where I'm no longer concerned about connecting with them. I'm about to delete them from my Facebook.
Right.
So, given that context, it's
Well, yeah.
There is some defense for what this method that you're using. So if you're going to use a diagnosis, and then I'm right with you as far as your argument here.
Right.
There are maybe less jackalish, the term for people who don't speak nonviolent communication. There are less jackalish ways to make your same points here, but I realize your point wasn't necessarily to connect.
Right. And in second thought, right, because the amount of traffic this article received, going back, you see, okay, perhaps I made a mistake. Now, I don't know, because the article is jackalish, is that why it spread like wildfire? If it was more connecting and if it was less controversial, would it have gotten the amount of traffic that it received? So there's that question. So it's possible that I made a mistake. Maybe it would have gotten all this traffic and could have connected with a lot more people. Or maybe it could have connected with nobody because it would have been read by nobody, right? So there's that little paradigm. Sure.
Yeah. Now, there's something to be said for the fact that to some people, this approach of labeling them as fine and having your acronym there, that's going to grab the attention of some people.
Right.
And that's going to get some people to, oh, that was a good one. He just nailed them. I'm going to share this. And so it gets distributed to more people. Or, can you believe he just said that? What a prick. I'm going to share this with people. You know what I mean? Either way, the message is getting out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, you don't know what of those things is going to help lead to spread. I mean, anytime you can have something that's controversial, that's going to get a lot of hits. That's going to, I mean, it's one of the ways to get something to go viral is to have something controversial. If you're not saying anything that's people haven't heard before 1,000 times, that's a for sure way that it's not going to go viral. And part of improving the world is getting the word out, you know? So you may be right that the success of this article is partly to do with making a diagnosis like this, with labeling people as, you know, the acronym fine. Mm-hmm. So, but as far as making the argument, it's not personally how I would have made it.
Right.
But just because you know, I'm not saying I'm a perfect giraffe by any means, but I'm working on being the best giraffe I can be, you know?
Yeah. And I think we talked about this also, that, you know, abrasiveness doesn't automatically mean it will not connect with people. So objective thinkers still often connect with abrasive statements, even things that they find perhaps personally insulting. I know that I have read some articles where the language was insulting, but at the same time it was true. And it still got me thinking, and I still ended up changing my prior position based on it. So just because something is abrasive and disconnected doesn't mean that it won't change people's minds and that they won't be able to connect with it.
Right. And it can grab your attention.
Right.
You know, sometimes that's necessary. There could be one argument made with less colorful language, another one made with more colorful language. You hear both, but the one you actually paid attention to was the one with colorful language. So that was the one that got the message across to you.
Absolutely.
Same argument, just, you know, said abrasively.
Right. All right, cool. So the next one is spanking is not the same as hitting. All right. When undesirable behaviors have a PR problem, they're immediately labeled as something less toxic and reframed in a positive light. Hitting is wrong, but spanking is discipline. Killing a baby is a tragedy, but aborting a fetus is not such a big deal. Politicians don't spend money we don't have. They invest in infrastructure. It's classic marketing. And our kids, the ones suffering the abuse, deserve better. If I can't legally spank my spouse, my employees, or my demented mother for wetting the bed for the third night in a row, then I shouldn't be able to legally spank my defenseless children. You can use whatever PR term you want. If it's not a universal principle, it's a steaming pile of bullshit.
Right. Yeah. The only criticism here is the, you know, using abortion. I realize you're not making that your argument, but anybody who is pro-choice is going to be instantly fired up and turned against you because you use the language killing a baby to associate it with an abortion. And knowing that it's pretty much, I think in the U.S. it's like 50-50. You know, it's one of those polar issues.
Right.
And you're not, at this point, making an argument for or against abortion to potentially alienate 50% of the people out there. And this even works even if you're directing the argument towards the audience, not necessarily towards the person you're sending the message to. It's like, well, shit, did I just alienate half my audience? At the same time, you also have kind of that controversy aspect where you're bringing a little controversy in there, which might get people to share it a little more, you know. Not sure, but that at least in the controversy in that area, it's not something people haven't heard. It's, you know, that's not something fresh, I should say. It's right. You know, people have heard the abortion argument, you know, a million times, and it's pretty much just you know, there's not much switching people.
Right.
I guess that's not true. I mean, there are people that are still open to be switched, that are still able to think rationally about it and listen to new arguments. But most people, it's just based on emotion. So,
right.
But I mean, otherwise, I mean, it's a small criticism because it's not like, it's just, you could have chosen, a different example. I mean, your argument still makes a lot of sense, no matter which side of the abortion issue you stand on. It still makes sense. It's just you're chancing alienating those pro-choice people.
So as I'm writing, and I want people to know this, as I'm writing, it's not as if I wrote this article completely unaware that there were about 3 or 4 areas that were highly controversial, right? And I made the decision to keep them in there. And I said in the comments section about one specific part in the very beginning that I do this often to vet people, that I know someone is either going to accept that even though this is controversial, it's true, and they're going to be okay with that. And then there's other people who are going to have a very vocal emotional reaction to it. And they are going to ignore the truth, or they are going to ignore the reason, and they are just going to attack based out of emotion. And I believe that this kind of writing gets quickly to the sorting of people. Are you a reasonable person, or are you a very emotional person? And I kind of want to know who I'm talking to ahead of time. I don't want to have an hour-long conversation with a lot of people to find this out. Because if we were very, PC about the article, we would get a bunch of comments and objections, and then during the objections, we wouldn't know which objection is reasonable, and we wouldn't know which objection is based on reason until we have a discussion with all these people. Now, I can't have a discussion with 100 people that are going to leave a comment on an article, so I think there's some sorting and sifting that can be pre-done by putting in controversial yet true statements to see who is reasonable, who is not reasonable. So I don't know. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, it's an interesting theory. It seems to me to be fairly sound, that it would be a way to weed out unreasonable people. I don't know if it's true. I mean, there are a lot of theories that sound like they are valid, but then when you actually do a study on them, it turns out there's nothing to it. So you may be right. You may be right that that's a good way to find out quickly. It's kind of like the people that say, that are very interested in finding a long-term relationship. They're like, when I go out on a date, I'm not doing chit-chat. I'm like, so where do you stand on religion? Do you want kids? This is like first, second date,
Right.
Where, do you want kids? Do you not want kids? How do you discipline kids? What's your family like? It's not, oh, did you see the latest Brad Pitt movie? What did you think of that?
Right.
It's, their time is a very precious resource, and it's important to use it wisely. So one of the ways to do that is to skip past the bullshit and find out if as you call it, a weeding mechanism. Use weeding mechanisms to save you time.
Right.
So you may be right there.
And I will say that, out of the 4 areas that I knew were, when I was writing and I was like, wow, that's highly controversial. I figured that this would be one that a bunch of people hit on, that a bunch of people objected to. And I will say that in over 80 comments, there has not been one objection to that statement. So, I was wrong about if it was controversial to people who read it, they didn't say anything about it. So.
Got it.
All right, so let's see. Next one. Sometimes spanking is just flat out necessary. Oh wait, I want to go back. Which one was it? Oh well, we already missed it. My parents hit me and I turned out just fine. In fact, I'm glad they spanked me. When we talked about that, I wanted to ask you about something, because there is the argument. I did not address this in this article, that spanking. There's 2 types of spanking apparently. One type of spanking is out of frustration and anger and just punishment on the scene of the crime, basically. And then the other version of spanking is after the fact, that's done in a calm manner out of compassion and love. And I want to know what you think about the latter.
Well, I think the latter is, for lack of a better term, a lot more honorable. This is a parent who thinks what they're doing is in the child's benefit, that this is the way to have healthy, responsible, respectful children, that turn into healthy, responsible, respectful adults. And they are acting out of what they believe is the best method, where I think that's pretty much a small minority of the people who spank, in my experience, just using what I see when I'm out and about. It's very much people, it's like the final straw, and they break, and they're like, it's an emotional response, like you called it. So,
because what I think is, I see that side of it. Absolutely. I do see that that's a possibility, but my gut reaction is I would much rather have somebody spanking out of anger and frustration, because that points to a lack of self-control. I know, okay, this is going to be very controversial too, but there are psychopaths and sociopaths, right? Sociopaths are typically like withdrawn, and they're not very outgoing, but they'll still murder you, right? And psychopaths are very outgoing, they're very charming, and they'll still murder you. And both of them will stare into your eyes very calmly as they plunge a knife into your chest. And this is kind of like where I stand on this. I spank them later out of calmness and love, and like, you are harming something, yet you're calm, and you're completely disconnected from the needs of this thing you're harming. And that to me is worse than somebody just getting angry and losing control of themselves and hitting something. That I for some reason, I can understand that so much better than I can understand I was angry then, I calmed down, and now I'm still going to assault this person. To me, there's just something there's much more disconnection there.
I mean, I'm sure there are examples out there of sociopaths and sadists and things of this nature who fit under that category that you're talking about. And maybe it's the majority. I don't know. There's a higher percentage of sociopaths out there than most people think. I think it's like 1 in 20.
And I'm not saying they need to be a sociopath or a psychopath. I'm just saying that there's a level of disconnection there. So the way there's a level of disconnection with sociopaths, obviously sociopaths and psychopaths are completely disconnected from the needs of other human beings, right? And I'm just saying there's a level of disconnection in that type of punishment, in my estimation.
So for me, here's what I'm thinking. You might have a parent, they're not a sociopath, and they're trying their hardest to be the best parent they can be. But they do believe that spare the rod spoils the child. And they're like, I don't want to spank when I'm angry, because then I might be doing something, maybe I'm just upset and the child didn't do anything wrong. And, I know that poor decisions are made in the heat of the moment, so I'm not going to do it in the heat of the moment. I want to be the best parent I could be. So I'm going to wait till things have calmed down, and then I'll make a decision. And if it turns out that the child is still in need of discipline, and when we're outside of the heat of the moment, I've calmed down, then I guess to be the best parent I can be, I don't want to spoil the child, so I can't spare that rod. And I know somebody who was like this, who was definitely not a sociopath, who was like one of the sweetest men I've ever met in my life, just a really nice guy, can tell you, and he was like this with his kids. And, I kind of liken it to, it's just bad information. Somebody that thinks low-fat diets are healthy for them. They're sitting there, they go to the store, and they're buying low-fat versions of food. And they're hurting themselves while they're doing this. I mean, it's a matter of ignorance. It has nothing to do with disconnectedness or anything like that.
Right. And I was going to say there's a second half to the possibility of people who do this. And I was going to say that second half is a religious group. I could see this happening in the religious paradigm because they feel they're being commanded to do this, whereas they may personally not feel good about it. So they could be connected and they could not feel good about what they're doing, but they are commanded to do it. Therefore, they do it. So I can absolutely see that. My question, I guess, for you is, this person that you knew, did he feel some sort of remorse about this act, or was he just, I don't know, what was his general feeling about it?
Yeah, I think he, I'm trying to remember back. I haven't seen the man. He's dead now. I haven't talked to him in many years. I would say that he probably felt that he wished the situation had gone another way. Mm-hmm. I think it's that he would obviously say, surely, I wish it didn't have to come to that. So
he just felt that was the only tool he had, I guess, or the only tool that would actually work.
Right. And it's funny you said the people that felt like they didn't want to be doing it, but they were commanded to do it. I'm reminded of this comic book I read when I was a kid, and it's just stuck with me through the years. It's funny how, you look at thousands and thousands of frames in a comic book, and this one frame is I still can see it clear as day. And it's Clark Kent's getting put over his dad's knee, pants down, his dad's spanking him. And you could see agony on the dad's face. He's like, son, this is hurting you more than it is me. But he was mean, and like Clark Kent's just kind of sitting there smiling, Superman, because it was like a play on those words where you hear people say that, oh, this is going to hurt me more than you, meaning like emotionally, like I really don't want to do this, but it's in your best interest.
Right.
Where in the cartoon, it was literally like, he's hitting the Man of Steel, and
it's hurting his hand. Nice.
So,
all right, we're done with that one?
Sounds good. Yep.
Okay.
See you next.
All right. Sometimes spanking is just flat out necessary. People who lack tools always declare the default route as necessary. If you're stuck in traffic on a freeway in a city you've never been to, there are no other options but to sit in the traffic. You might even tell your anxiety-ridden spouse, this is the only way. If you've lived in the city your entire life, you might know of 5 alternative routes you can take to escape the traffic. You choose an alternate path and you enjoy the time saved. People who were spanked as children have learned a certain dialect of discipline. Just like a language or the city they grew up in, it's very familiar to them. It becomes the default. It crowds out insight into other tools. They insist it's necessary only because they're not privy to alternatives. Spanking is necessary is a declaration of naivete and unpreparedness. Parents who fall into this trap are also the first to use the excuse, I'm doing the best I can. If empty excuses advanced one's parenting skills, we'd all be experts by now. It's time for parents to start owning their behavior and choosing action over distraction.
Yeah. No, that's good. It's right on. I mean, they are missing kind of the component there of why do people say these things that can so quickly fall apart. Like, I'm doing the best I can. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, and I don't know, we could have a whole podcast on just like unpacking that one, but
yeah.
It's,
and I did write an article on it.
Right. I mean, you always know you could always read another parenting book. You can always go to how many parenting workshops have you been to lately? You
Right.
could do more, and it's a balancing act, And
that was my argument in the article, that most people who say, in my experience, who say, or who use the I'm doing the best I can excuse, haven't actually taken any steps to, right. Like, they haven't read a book. Like, maybe they've watched a few episodes of Super Nanny or something, which is quite
Wait.
unfortunate.
You're saying you need more than that?
I believe you need a little more than that. And yeah, I would actually recommend that people not watch any episode of Super Nanny, unless they're trying to figure out what not to do. But these people typically have not read a book. They have not gone to a workshop. They have gone, the extent of doing the best they can is repeating what their parents did to them and talking to their friends and getting advice from whoever is nearby. And, that's the extent.
It's funny that you're right. It's the ones who use that excuse are the ones that typically have put in almost no effort. Because if you have attended a parenting workshop and read a few books, you realize very quickly that you're not doing the best you can.
Right.
And even that you can probably never say that and be telling the truth.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
I mean?
Right. So the people who are self-aware would never make that argument, right? That argument is only made by people who aren't self-aware.
Right. So, I mean, I know every day I can always be doing better. Right. So,
Yeah, there is no underlying, we are perfect to any of these messages. You can't write an article, or let's say dozens of articles, and start each one with, by the way, I'm not perfect. Like, that should just be the underlying tone. That's the preface, the automatic preface of every article I write. All right. Just so people know. Okay. All right. You don't know my kids. How can you possibly know what they need? I don't know your demented mother who urinates the bed every night, but I know that she doesn't deserve to be hit for it. I don't know your spouse, but I know that locking her in her room for burning your dinner is emotional abuse. I don't know your employees, but I know that raging at them in a company meeting is unacceptable. I know that teaching your children that hitting is wrong when you hit them multiple times per week is hypocritical. I can know a lot of things without knowing anything about you or your children. This is nothing more than a straw man argument that allows you to avoid objectively looking at your own behavior.
Nope, like it.
All right. I think that one's pretty straightforward.
Yep.
All right, so the next one, you might have time to baby your kids, but I don't. I just need them to be obedient. If you have time to scream at your children for 15 minutes, you have time to warmly set limits and validate. If you have time to spank your children and levy punishments, you have time to hug them and connect with them and teach them why their behavior is undesirable. If you have time to monitor a timeout station and repeatedly put them back in the naughty chair or a corner, you have plenty of time to work out the problem peacefully. The real deficiency isn't with time, it's with tools. Lastly, obedience isn't a virtue. It's morally reprehensible. The Stanford prison experiment or the Milgram experiment clearly demonstrate the evil of obedience. Requiring obedience from your children is requiring them to forfeit their humanity.
Yeah, I'm still just kind of in shock at being reminded of the existence of things that parents would call a naughty chair.
Right.
I mean, I know these things are out there, but it's so wrong that when you're reminded of it, you're like, God damn, thank God I'm not being put in the naughty chair every day.
Right. And really, I mean, I can't believe Super Nanny thinks that's acceptable, because it's not just a chair you put someone in. It's basically been moralized. Like, this is the chair for bad people, right? This is the chair for naughty people. And, if you don't understand that kids will grow into that label, that's highly disconnected.
Right. Yeah. I like your tying in the piece where obedience is not really a virtue.
Right.
I wonder what do you want somebody to do what you tell them because you told them, or because they respect you as a leader and you've given them good advice in the past, so it served them well to listen to your advice in the past, so they're gonna give you the benefit of the doubt on this one and follow. It's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. If anybody watches the Milgram experiment, the video is not very long, and I linked to it in the article. You go watch the Milgram experiment, and you watch these people. Basically, it's an experiment where they put somebody in a room who's an actor, and they have real people come into this other room with a doctor or the person who is administering the experiment. And basically, they ask them questions through a microphone, and the actor, responds. And if they give the wrong answer, which the actor does numerous times, they have to shock them. And the shocks increase in, I'm not a science major or anything, I think in voltage. And the higher it gets, basically they're labeled on there. So the highest one says like XXX or death or something like that. And so these people in the experiment are making their way up to that level of shock. And you watch them turn around and object to the person running the experiment and saying, because they can hear that the person is in pain, the actor, or there's a recording, I believe, of somebody in pain every time this person hits the shock button. And they even at one point say, I want to quit. I want to quit the experiment. And these people who are administering the shocks, these obedient people, are constantly turning around to the administrator and saying, I'm not sure if I want to continue with this. And basically he has a programmed response of, the experiment calls for you to continue. And he doesn't really give any other explanation. He just says it very sternly, like with his lab coat on, and they think about it for a second, and then they go right back to what they were doing. They ask more questions, they continue shocking, and it just shows that it's because this authority figure is sitting here, these people are slaves to their desire to be obedient that's been basically either beat into them or punished into them in some way. And it's really unfortunate.
Right. And I think it even gets to the point where they're administering a lethal dosage of a lethal voltage. And I think they tell them that. They're like, this will be a lethal voltage. And still, like, half of the people still administered it.
Yeah, and there's one girl I remember where she shocks the person and there is no response. And she turns around and she's like, did we kill him? And she's like giggling. And like, this is real. She has no idea what's happening on the other side of this wall. And she's giggling about the fact that she may have just killed this person. And that's quite unfortunate.
Yeah. I'm just going back to the argument here. Yeah. I think the pointing out obedience pretty much is not, is not a virtue. You're not raising a dog. You're raising a person.
Right.
Is the one thing that I think people need to ask themselves whenever they're thinking about using a punishment or something like that. And this is something that's really good with anyone in your life, whether you're dealing with someone you work with or a client or your spouse. You need to ask yourself, is what I'm about to say, does it have the chance to damage the relationship? What I'm about to say or what I'm about to do, does it have the chance of damaging the relationship? And then if the answer is yes, you need to ask yourself, what's more important to me, this thing or the relationship? And if the answer is the relationship's more important to me, then you need to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, surely there's some other way we can get past this problem. Let's figure out what the problem is and find a solution. So a parent that says, I just need obedience, you need to ask yourself, is this damaging the relationship? If I'm taking my kid, putting them over my lap and beating their ass, does that have a chance of damaging the relationship? I think that's a pretty easy one to answer.
Yeah.
So then, okay, is damaging, what's more important to me, obedience or my relationship with my child? And so if your answer is still obedience, then you probably shouldn't be having kids. And go.
Man, controversial there, Chris.
Go get the vasectomy or whatever. If you got one in the oven, consider giving them up for adoption. but if the answer is, well, of course the relationship is more important, then you got to go back to the drawing board. You got to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what are my other options out there? Maybe I've been narrowing my options a little too much. Maybe I need to take some parenting courses. Maybe I need to listen to some more episodes of Reboot Your Kids. And people don't do that. I mean, you see it in relationships. People say things, there's like, people level criticisms at their spouse and damage the relationship, and then it ends in divorce. Say, well, this thing that's bothering me, the dishes didn't get done. What's more important to me, my relationship with my spouse or the dishes getting done? Well, the relationship is obviously more important. Okay, so now that doesn't mean you just say, well, fuck it, I guess dishes just keep piling up. We're going to switch over to plastic spoons and knives and paper plates from now on. No, I mean, what you do is you go back to the drawing board. Okay, so how can we solve this problem of the dishes getting done without damaging the relationship? And there are things like nonviolent communication and the like. There's a lot of different ways to skin that cat, but criticism is one that's going to damage the relationship. So, that's one of the arguments I like to make when, dealing with things like this is, okay, are you damaging the relationship or not? And probably on several of these, you could put that same argument in there. Okay, what's more important to you, the relationship or X, whatever it is you're using as your argument? Right.
My therapist used to say you can be right or you can be married. And I think that really kind of sums it up. If you want to be right all the time, you are not going to be married very long. And, you have to find other ways to work it out.
Yeah.
All right, next one. Kids need to hear the word no. so they don't turn into spoiled brats. You are right that kids need to learn boundaries, limits, and self-regulation, but they learn that through teaching and modeling, not by hearing an arbitrary word. If you abuse the word no, you can easily teach a child that they have no autonomy, that their needs and wants aren't relevant, and that their opinions aren't important by refusing to negotiate. That encourages defiance, which you perceive as the behavior of a spoiled brat. Then you double down on your tactics. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. There are many peaceful parents who don't set limits and boundaries to the detriment of their children. There are also abusive parents who fail to do the same, choosing instead to completely blow their lid when the final straw breaks the back of their patience. The issue doesn't have anything to do with authentic peaceful parenting. It has to do with limits and boundaries.
Yeah, so this is just another false dichotomy. It's either I'm a strict authoritarian parent, or you're a loosey-goosey, anything goes, and your parent, either you're controlling your kids or your kids walk all over you.
Right.
Those are your options, which is clearly ridiculous. So, and this is the way to win that argument by saying, because if it's true that kids need to hear the word no. It's not true that they need to, if they don't hear the word no, then they turn into spoiled brats. Mm-hmm. So.
Right. Okay. All right. That one's pretty straightforward. You want to be friends with your kids. My kids don't need me to be a friend. They need me to be a parent. Being, quote unquote, friends with your kids is what all parents should aim to be. The phrase, however, has been hijacked to mean you don't set limits or have boundaries. Kids should be respected the way you respect your friends, and you should have limits and boundaries with your friends the same way you have limits and boundaries with your kids. If you wouldn't rage at your friends, don't rage at your kids. If you would show patience and grace with your friends, then show patience and grace with your kids. If you wouldn't hit your friends, then don't hit your kids. If you can teach your friends something without resorting to those tactics, then you can teach your kids something without them as well. A child's future behavior is determined by how they're treated. Their status as a child isn't an argument for the efficacy of aggressive behavior toward them. It's an excuse. You can get away with assaulting them because they're defenseless. To you, that's an opportunity. Assault your friend and see what happens. What you really are is a coward.
So in this one, again, my jackal ears, I hear the jackal popping up there and, name calling and, which also not only does this, end any chance that you would have of connecting with somebody by calling them names, but it also opens the door that they could say, oh, well, you're just using an ad hominem. So this is an area where people that have a little bit enough logic mm-hmm. to be able to use it to dismiss you whenever you use a fallacy. So if you use it, they're like, oh, you used an ad hominem on me, so you're the one that's actually being illogical, Kevin. So I don't need to listen to you anymore. You're unreasonable. You're not logical.
Which is actually a fallacy in itself.
Right. That is, that's the fallacy. There's probably another.
Two Coke, I think is what it's called.
Right. Yeah. There's certainly a Latin name for it, but right. Yeah. So, I mean, that's my.
But yeah, you're saying it gives them an opportunity to make that, basically to distract from the conversation because that happened.
Right. And, that would be my one criticism of this argument. I agree with you, what you're saying, but, if I was going to critique it and say I wouldn't have made the argument in this way.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Kids are not adults. They don't deserve respect. All right. You're half right. The first statement is true. The second is patently false. Adults are notorious for treating children as second-class citizens because it's convenient to do so. It's easier to own an obedient robot who you're free to abuse and manipulate than it is to peacefully raise a virtuous, free-thinking, autonomous child. Here's a wake-up call. Your child is not your property. We used to say that women and blacks were our property, and we've managed to evolve past that. Behaving as if children are your property is a declaration that you're still stuck in the dark ages of humanity. Your child's relationship with you should be seen as voluntary, just as your spouse's relationship with you is voluntary. If you can't earn an authentic relationship with them, you don't deserve to have one. Your child didn't choose you and they can't escape. Sick people see that as a green light for hypocritical behavior. Virtuous people see it as a mandate to treat them with the utmost respect.
Right. Yeah, this is, again, using more of like moralistic judgment in there. Sick people, do you want to be sick or virtuous? Virtuous or non-virtuous? Good or evil? Which, caused my NBC radar to go off. So, just not the language I would have used. I do see what you're saying. I would say that as far as the actual argument, I don't hear many people, I don't know that I've ever heard anyone say that children do not deserve respect. Mm-hmm. What I hear more is kids are not adults. They don't know how to negotiate. So I hear what you're saying, but yeah, with adults, you use the skill of negotiation when you have a problem. With a child, you beat their ass. Now, they don't use that term. They use the word spank, but let's call things by their proper terms here. So that's the one I hear, is that, it would be great if I could be friends with my child. Of course, with my spouse, I want to be friends with my coworkers. It just, things run more smoothly if you can have a friendly relationship. Sure, that would be nice to have, but kids aren't adults. So I have to be a parent to them. I can't be a friend. So that's the one thing that I don't know that I've heard that one before. You hear that one a lot?
Do you want to know how to prompt it from people?
Sure.
All right, just say, that's disrespectful. So if somebody brings up spanking, just say, I just can't do that because it's disrespectful. And they will counter with, they don't deserve respect. That's when you'll hear it.
Really?
Yeah. That's when I hear it anyway.
Interesting.
And I don't know if it's just a reaction. I mean, maybe it's just a reaction because that's what they just want to argue, and they just haven't really thought in depth about what they're saying. I'm not sure. But when I say that's disrespectful, I almost always get the response, but they're kids. They don't deserve respect.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'll try that one next time.
Okay. All right, last one. I'm a good parent. You need to stop judging me. One of the biggest movements right now is the mom as victim movement. Posting research that shows spanking damages a child's brain elicits a victimhood response from moms all over the internet. Yep, more judgments about how I'm the worst mom in the world. We already have enough anxiety. All you want to do is make us feel bad and shame us. Playing the victim card is not helpful. In fact, since the safety and psychological well-being of voiceless children is at stake, I'd say it's quite selfish and destructive. Children deserve to have a voice, regardless of how you claim it makes you feel. If you volunteer to be a mother or father, then you volunteer for scrutiny if you choose to behave in a hypocritical and destructive manner. I wouldn't stand for your husband hitting you, so I won't stand for you hitting your daughter or son. It's not about judgment, it's about reason. As far as guilt is concerned, just because you feel guilt doesn't mean I'm shaming you. The guilt you feel is a sign that you have a conscience. Listen to that conscience, leverage it, and do the right thing.
Yeah, just, again, some of the same complaints, critiques, I should say. I'm not really complaining about it, but it was just, there's some diagnosis in there, and some name calling and the like. So, selfish, destructive, those sort of things, hypocritical. But, I mean, your arguments are spot on. I mean, it is a selfish act to, sit, to,
play the victim card, basically.
Play the victim, right, yeah, so.
All right, good. Well, that was the last one. So what we'll do now, there were some final thoughts I put on, but I don't think they're important to the context of this podcast. So I will move into a couple of the comments that I highlighted. All right, guys, I'm going to pause it there. All right, we will see you next week with the other half of this discussion. Have a great weekend.
Because I'm the wanderer. Yeah, I'm the wanderer. Roam around and round and round and round. Take it, Mark. town, live life without a care. I'm as happy as a clown, with my 2 fists of iron, but I'm going nowhere. I'm the type of guy who never settles down. The pretty girls are, they know that I'm around. I kiss them and I love them, cause to me they're all the same. I hug them and I squeeze them, they don't even know my name. They call me the Wanderer, yeah, I'm the Wanderer. I roam around and round and round and round. Yeah, I'm the Wanderer, yeah, I'm the Wanderer. I roam around and round and round and round. One more time.